From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 134, recorded on May 23rd, 2017. Hi everybody, I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today from an undisclosed remote location, Daniel Griffin.
Hello everybody.
How are you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing well. It's been a good week.
Weather's getting a little bit warmer, right?
You know, it keeps bouncing back and forth, just sort of keeping me on my toes.
We had a couple of warm days, and then all of a sudden it got pretty cold again, didn't it?
It did.
Yep. So it's the same out there that it's been here, I presume, right?
Exactly.
The American Society for Microbiology wants to tell you about their grant writing online course. Learn the best practices in grant writing during this course. Participate to receive an overview of the funding landscape. Learn what makes grants successful and receive personalized feedback on your grant. It's a 7-part series that's going to take place in the fall of 2017. Registration deadline, July 15th. You can learn more about this course at bit.ly/ASMGWOC17. All one word. ASM, let me start from the beginning. bit.ly/ASMGWOC17. Well, Daniel, we had some responses to last week's case, so let's remind people what it's all about.
Yes. For those of you clicking back in or clicking in for the first time, last time we discussed a case that I saw while I was working in a remote mountain mobile clinic up in the wilds of the Dominican Republic on the Haitian border. I traveled from a small town where I was staying about 3 hours in the back of the mayor's pickup truck. And this makeshift clinic was set up in a woman's center. And one of the patients I saw was a 6-year-old little girl. And she was brought in by the concerned mother with failure to thrive relative to her sister, a protuberant belly, frequent abdominal discomfort. This has been going on for, she says, over a year, but, you know, with the failure to grow, may have been longer. No history of surgery, no meds. And this is the first time that this child is ever seeing I would refer to myself as a medical professional. The mother and sister are there. There's actually 3 children in the family we described. The father does timber work when he can find it. It's a very impoverished region. So this family is living in a home with a dirt floor. They're drinking untreated water from the local stream. They go to the bathroom outside, and so there's concerns about contamination of the water supply. The diet is very high in carbohydrates, a lot of plantains, rice and beans, not a lot of good protein sources. And on exam, the thing that really stood out is this young girl has a protuberant belly. Her liver and spleen are not enlarged, and she does have some edema. And we had sort of this ringer at the end when we were, sort of going further into it. Dixon, when I was actually discussing this case with him previously, he asked, did the mother ever notice anything in the girl's feces? And yes, the mother had noticed a long motile worm in the girl's feces. And we should probably describe it. It was several inches in length.
Well, I think as far as I could tell, everyone's sort of on the same track. First guess was from Nita, who writes, greetings, hello to the TWiP-tastic peeps. I missed Dr. Despommier in the last episode, but I had a great time listening in. And you're going to miss him this time, too. Sorry. For our last case, 132, I did have a fun memory to share. Growing up in Taiwan during my grade school years, we would receive packets of slippets that had a target bullseye pattern that was sticky on one side to bring home. Every family member would stick it on their butts to essentially perform their own Scotch tape exam, cover the sticky side with the clear plastic to keep whatever you stuck on your butt on the adhesive end, and bring them to school. And she sends a picture of this. It's called a pinworm test sticker. It's got a little bullseye there. Got to put that on the right place.
I actually went ahead and clicked on that. It's kind of cute.
Yes. Chinese writing on it. I wonder what the Chinese writing says. It would be interesting to find out, right?
Let me see. See if I can read any of this. Let's see if it'll open for me. The loop. I used to actually read and write Chinese.
You might be able to do it.
Oh, I like this. Yeah, it's definitely a great picture for our... you're going to post this, right? So our listeners can click on in and...
For sure.
Maybe someone will translate it for us.
All right. I have no idea who looks at all these packets, but I would guess someone in the health office, maybe the nurses or local doctor assigned to the school, would be the sad fellow appointed to this wriggling mess. Well, it's either plus or minus, Daniel, right? You either have something on it or nothing, right?
But the interesting thing is identifying what actually is a parasitic egg versus what might be something not parasitic. It's actually tricky. Dixon should be here for these comments, so I'll jump in as his surrogate. But there's a parasitologist, Bobby Pratt, who I think Pratt. I think I'm pronouncing that Pritt, Bobby Pritt.
Yeah.
And she puts these mystery cases out on the internet, and a lot of times she'll put stuff that's not a parasite. Yeah. And so sometimes like mushroom spores will look very similar to certain parasitic eggs. The issue will be a lack of operculum, right? So a lack of an opening. They're just too darn symmetrical, or the fact that they're the wrong size. And so, there's certain parasitic diseases that have been described. We know what the eggs look like. Sometimes a lack of segmentation when you're looking at an actual worm. So it's not always easy. You actually need a bit of training. This is the trained lab techs to really look at this and know, are those pinworm eggs? Are those mushroom spores? Et cetera.
Okay. It's good to know mushroom spores. There's somebody sitting on
mushroom spores.
All right, back to Nita. On to my guess for case 133, the young Haitian child suffering from failure to thrive with observed motile worms and feces opens the can of worms to a few possible differentials, notably Asterisks lumbricoides, hookworm, or whipworm. From this list, I think Asterisks lumbricoides is probably the most likely answer. This is an intestinal parasite that clogs up the lymphatic system, which can explain our patient's edema. It can also result in intestinal obstruction, which can manifest in the protuberant belly, as this worm can multiply and grow quite large, as seen in the photographed preserved jar from the Meguro Parasitological Museum via my sneaky photo skills. Yeah, it says she sends a picture of when she visited that museum in Tokyo.
I wonder, do they allow photography? Is that what it was?
It sounds like they don't, and she snuck them. Nutritional deficiency can result from the obstruction and the energy siphoning from the worms. The patient likely was infected through the fecal route with poor sanitary conditions. With earth floors, it's easy to track in infected dirt, or with unsanitized water source, the worms may also be ingested. Usually the worms are also found in the pulmonary system, as is the hookworm. Diagnosis is done by stool microscopy, and I think the standard treatment can be albendazole 400 milligrams PO or mebendazole 500 milligrams for those older than 2 years. Also, everting uterus from the pinworm made me giggle. What a great way to describe this. Thanks again for continuing the awesome podcast.
All right. So there, I guess we'll go back because there's a few things I'll want to comment about. We don't have Dixon here. He usually he cringes when there's something he doesn't agree with. So I'm sort of, in my mind, I'll cringe and get back to stuff that we want to. But yes, I like the everting uterus. I guess the pinworm really wants to get rid of those eggs, so sort of spraying them out. David writes, "Dear hosts, judging from Daniel's hints regarding a certain image in a book, as well as adding up the factors described in the current case, abdominal discomfort, distended belly, lack of nutrition compared to her sister, long motile worm in the feces, I will venture a guess that this young girl has been infected with Asterisks lumbricoides. She most likely contracted the parasite eggs after coming into contact with soil or water contaminated with feces from her impoverished environment. I came across a link that states Asterisks is one of the most common worm infections in Haiti. There's a link there. And I hope this little girl received the treatment she needed, treatment for this parasite. ascaricides are albendazole, mebendazole, lebamisole, or parental palmoate. Thank you once again for the informative and entertaining podcast. Sincerely, David P., Molecular Helminthology Lab, Tufts Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine.
All right, Wink writes, Dear TWiP team, I found the picture in your fantastic text, so I must say ascariasis with a heavy worm burden. But I was wondering if strongyloidiasis would also fit this case. I was thinking about the latter because of the edema on the abdomen and wondering if the immune deficiency of malnutrition is sufficient to lead to hyperinfection. Wink, Weinberg, Atlanta. Have to come back to that one too, Daniel.
I think so, yes. Trudy writes, that was a short one for you, but Dear TWiPers, I think the girl is infected with Strongyloides stercoralis. She probably contracted the parasite from the dirt floor in her home, as Strongyloides is one of the few parasites which can penetrate unbroken skin. It could also be Strongyloides foliborni, which I'm going to stick to stercoralis. As an aside, other parasites which are capable of penetrating broken skin include schistosomes, cercaria, and hookworm. I learned this from Dixon. Thanks, Dixon. Regards, Trudy.
Yeah, if you listen to TWiP every other week, you're going to learn a lot because it's all there. Yosef writes, Dear TWiP team, my differential for this case would be that our young patient has an Ascaris infection. These large worms can live in our GI tracts and have a life cycle similar to Strongyloides, but without a reinfection. Our patient probably had food contaminated with Ascaris eggs. From there, the eggs would hatch within her GI system, and the larvae would then spread via the blood vessels or lymphatics to her lungs, where they would climb up the bronchi and then trachea and be swallowed, so that they could live their adult lives in the GI system. Judging from her lack of lung symptoms and her short stature as compared to her sister, this infection is most likely a chronic one, and she has thus lost a lot of nutrients over time. Thankfully, it does not appear that full-blown kwashiorkor or marasmus has developed, and without a painful belly, I assume that there is no current GI or biliary obstruction. A stool sample could be used to look for eggs. A single dose of albendazole could be used for treatment. I hope that she had enough catch-up growth that she could at least match her sister in height. Sincerely, Yosef Davidov. P.S. I had forgotten that you guys asked for audio clips for a differential, so I tried to do one for this case. I was pretty nervous making this, so I do apologize for any awkward pauses. If this goes well, then I will try to continue using audio files. So that I will insert Yosef's audio into the episode when I edit it, because at the moment I don't have a way of playing it and having everyone hear it. It would be very easy for me to put it on an iPad and plug the iPad into the audio stream, but I don't have that set up, so I'll add it separately, but you can listen, and next time I'll do it right.
This is Joseph, the Hofstra medical student, and since you guys stated that you'd like an audio clip for the differential, I will try to do it and try not to embarrass myself. For the differential in TWiP 133, I think the patient has an Ascaris infection. These worms she would probably get the eggs from contaminated food source from somewhere in the DR. And once the eggs travel down the GI tract, they can hatch within the duodenum or somewhere within her intestines. From there, the larvae could migrate past the intestinal wall into either a lymphatic vessel or another type of venous blood vessel, and then travel up and eventually get to the lungs. From the capillaries in the lungs, they could migrate into the lung tissue and then mature and start to travel up. They travel up through the bronchioles, the bronchi, the trachea, up all the way to the esophagus, where they'd be swallowed, which is not a very pleasant thought, and then re-enter the GI tract where they can live as adults. From there, they could create more eggs, which be released from the GI system. Ascaris are really large worms, and so I think her swollen abdomen may be from the worms themselves, or more worrisome if they're ever cause any type of blockage. In her case, she doesn't have any pain, so I don't think there's any acute type of blockage, but it's definitely something to watch out for. And I think the large worm that came with her stool may be one of the adult ones that got passed through. I haven't heard of that happening, but I guess it could happen. I'm not as confident with this diagnosis as I am with others. As well, they would take up quite a lot of nutrients, and this could explain why she's so small compared to her sister. I don't think she's developed full-on kwashiorkor or marasmus, but it's definitely worrisome. Hopefully, once she's treated, she can start to have some catch-up growth, and I hope that she matches her sister in height, at least after a few years. A single dose of albendazole could be used for treatment. For diagnosis, I guess if you have the worm and it looks like the typical worm, you can use that, or you could always look for the stool for the typical eggs. And yeah, I hope that she got better. Let us know what happened. And then for PS, I mentioned previously the different syndromes and how to pronounce them. So yeah, I've always been taught that Gilbert should be pronounced as Gilbert. Kaposi sarcoma should be pronounced as Kaposi sarcoma. And then lastly, for PCP, pneumocystis jirovecii, I was also taught to pronounce it as pneumocystis jirovecii, although I'm completely unsure of what's the correct version. So yeah, thank you again for all that you do, and I really enjoy looking forward to these cases. I wish you all the very best.
I guess if people are going to really start doing this on a regular basis, we have to modify our technology.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do it. I just don't have it set up at the moment, but I just need to... this laptop that I'm using, I will have to put its audio output into the mixer so that it becomes part of the recording, and that's relatively simple to do.
Sounds great. I look forward to it. All right. Elise writes, Dear TWiP Trifecta. I guess we're a bifecta at the moment.
We are a bifecta, yeah.
I hope this finds all of you well. Look at me, back in the swing of things, I hope, writing a diagnosis, although the last one I submitted was late. I suspect that the little girl Dr. Griffin met in the Dominican Republic is the victim of a substantial infestation of Asterisks lumbricoides. Initially, I thought that she suffered from something a little less dramatic, but when I heard the detail of the mother actually seeing a large motel worm in her daughter's stool, I revised my thinking. The patient and her family live in conditions that are ideal for contracting this nematode. They are in constant contact with dirt, and there is poor sanitation where they live. In addition, children are more likely to become more symptomatic and more adversely impacted by a roundworm infestation because their intestines are so much smaller than those of adults. It is not uncommon for people infected with Asterisks lumbricoides to experience very few symptoms unless they are hosting a lot of worms. Younger children are more likely to have symptoms and be negatively impacted by an infestation, most notably by failing to grow properly due to not being able to absorb enough nutrients, as is the case with this child. There is another possible parasite suspecting in this case, Trichuris, Trichura, or whipworm. Like Asterisks, this is a soil-transmitted parasite, but the symptoms of a Trichuris infection, and since this case has appeared in such a rural area and there's little access to sophisticated testing, the little girl's symptoms seem to provide the best guide for diagnosis. Involve much more obvious stomach upset, abdominal pain, nausea, bloody diarrhea, sudden weight loss. The patient in this case seems to have much more chronic symptoms, most crucially failing to grow, and her distended belly, which points more towards Asterisks. In both cases, the most common treatment appears to be with mebendazole or albendazole. However, this patient's case seems so pronounced that I wonder if she needs some surgical intervention too, to remove the worms that have proliferated so much in her body. Thank you so much for your work. I hope all is well. Elise in Lower Manhattan.
Wow, welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back.
We missed you. All right, that will do it. We had, let's see, one Ascaris. We had a second Ascaris. We had a Strongyloides. We had a...
Second Strongyloides.
Second Strongyloides and another Ascaris and another Ascaris. So, there you go. pretty much centering on Asterisks or strongyloides. Now, the last thing you told us, Daniel, was that the mother had seen a long motile worm in the girl's feces. So what did you do next?
So it's, as I described, this is up in a remote mountain location. So there's not a diagnostic lab here.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas I've described in the past somewhat limited. So we're basing this on all the information that everyone got last time. I'm able to ask a little bit more about how long the worm is, the size of the worm. And I think that helps here. If you think about the worms, I'll say, that you might see with strongyloides, these are small worms where we're down, at the, barely able to see. While your Asterisks worm is actually going to be several inches in length.
So that's consistent with what the mother saw, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the case. Is you're not, people are not going to come in saying, "Oh, my child has strongyloides," and I saw the strongyloides. I mean, these are basically microscopic larvae that sure. We're going to see, not that you're going to see with the naked eye. The other, which I think a lot of people brought up, is they brought up other things, and could this very well be a mixed infection? Is it clear that this little girl only has Asterisks? And as we know from a lot of surveys in regions, it's often that children will have multiple infections. So this child very well could have Asterisks, could also have hookworm infection as well, also quite common in these parts. The other issue I think that people brought up, which really is could this little girl also have strongyloides? She's malnourished. She's small for her age. She's living basically on this dirt floor, so probably lots of exposure. Has she been infected with strongyloides in her lifetime? Just epidemiologically, probably. And I have seen very similar presentations to this where the child actually had severe strongyloides, hyperinfections. And sometimes what they'll actually end up with is this sort of perianal called buttock rash, which this child didn't have. But I don't think there's anything about this case that would rule out a strongyloides infection as well. I think what we do have is a compelling story for at least we have Asterisks as a major player here, to the point where we're seeing worms in the stool.
Would the same drug hit both?
To some degree, our albendazole, which is what we ended up giving this girl, is going to treat a lot of our helminths. It's not really, in all honesty, the best drug for strongyloides, right? Our ivermectin is going to be a better drug there. I've actually seen people treated with albendazole and then been consulted why do the larvae not disappear, and I think it's because the success rate with albendazole, though it is a drug with efficacy, is not quite as efficacious as an ivermectin dose. The other challenge, right, is this young girl is going to stay in this environment. So, right. We're helping to some degree, but the best way to approach a lot of these issues is sort of broad treatment programs, right? Targeting school-based children, treating, once or twice a year to try to keep the worm burden down. The interesting thing is you give this young girl albendazole, which she got, it's going to greatly reduce the worm burden, but it's not going to completely sterilize or get rid of all the worms. But hopefully it is going to help with the immune deficiency and the failure to thrive and all the other issues that are going on.
So is it just a single dose you would get?
So that would be the interesting sort of issue relative to hookworms versus Asterisks. Asterisks, usually a single dose is what we recommend, but often with hookworm, they'll recommend three doses, so treating them for 3 days in a row. Again, greatly reducing the worm burden, but again, not curing, not completely sterilizing.
Yeah. Now, this is a remote location. Where are you going to get this drug? Did you bring it with you?
That was the interesting challenge. So we the day before we loaded up a bunch of crates with whatever available medicines we could get, and sort of scrambled together donations, certain amount of money that we could use to buy some from the local hospital pharmacy, and then we set up on a table what we have available, and then you're kind of looking at what people have and doling out your limited supplies.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't think there was a neighborhood pharmacy, right?
everything that you're going to use, you've got to bring with you, and then you actually you dispense it right then. So it's sort of a nice setup. I would write out the script. This is what I want them, and then they would walk over to the pharmacy table, and then they would get their script dispensed, and then someone would explain to them, what it is that we wanted them to do. And
now, is there going to be any follow up?
No, and that's the challenge, right? Is that in an ideal situation, you'd want to go and, how does this girl do? We treated her, and let's say we see her in a month, is she starting to grow? Is her height starting to come up? All the other issues.
Mm-hmm. So in the end, you don't really know what it is in this child. I mean, in the book, there is a picture of a young child with a distended belly, and it says, I think, Asterisks on that, right?
Yeah, this is for anyone who has our hard cover. This is, I guess, people who did the electronic download. If you go to the end of chapter 18 of Asterisks lumbricoides, we have two pictures. One is figure 18.6, and it's this young girl, similar age, less than 10, with a distended belly. And then she is treated with mebendazole, and you see a pan full of Asterisks worms. And actually, that would be, you wouldn't need to be around for a long time. You could just ask the mom, so many days later, did stuff come out? And yes.
I guess you have to warn them about this. Otherwise, they would freak out, right?
It's interesting. You and I would freak out. People in this country would freak out. Worms are actually quite a common part of the life of a lot of these people. And I remember we went to one house. This is on a different day. And there was a little boy, and the boy was, doing something he wasn't supposed to, according to the mom. And she was warning him that if he didn't go and sit down and do whatever he was supposed to, the worms, the gusanos, were going to get him. And we had a discussion afterwards about...
How do you spell that?
Gusanos, gusanos, the worms. Gusanos? I think that's right. I hope that's right. And so that the gusanos were going to get him. And so, it's interesting, right? The boogeyman there are these, parasitic Asterisks worms that might be seen in the feces that, if you're not good, they're going to come and get you.
According to the Urban Dictionary, it's a Chicano pejorative for Hispanics.
Really? That's not good.
No. But I mean, it could also be, let's do Google Translate to get the official worm. Yeah, it's the real word is worm, but in the Urban Dictionary, it can be something nasty. So we are using it in the medical sense.
Yes, we're using it in the gusanos that were expelled in this little girl's feces. Let me see. There were another couple things that I wanted to talk about. So the first thing, and I'll go to our first, it was from Nita. Nita emails us. And she actually goes through, to some degree, the life cycle of Asterisks, which is really a fascinating life cycle. I mean, as excited as I was, I think, last time with the pinworm, I can almost get as excited about Asterisks. I like to think of the Asterisks as the teenager, right? And you'll see in a moment why I say that. So the way you get infected with Asterisks is by oral ingestion, usually in feces, of these embryonated eggs, right? We talk about embryonated eggs, meaning it takes a period of time for the egg to mature to a point where it becomes infective. And that occurs in the soil. So somehow, people do what they always do. They breathe, they consume feces, and it ends up being ingested. And then the larvae are going to hatch out of these embryonic eggs in the small intestine, right? So now they're the small intestine, which is where ultimately they're going to end up, right? This is where we're going to come back to the teenage issue. Now these larvae enter the bloodstream, and they migrate around. They end up in the heart. They end up into the lung capillaries. The lung capillaries, they end up entering the alveolar spaces. The larvae, now they're sort of going through a series of maturation stages. They end up in the alveolar spaces where they are coughed up, swallowed, and then they mature to adults back in the small intestine. So this is sort of the teenager. They start off where they really need to be, but they all wander around, find themselves, and boom, end up back in the small intestine. And the problem with our little girl here is that if you get a sort of a large Asterisks burden, it can start actually clogging things up. The intestinal parasite, she says, clogs up the lymphatic system. Lymphatic system is not a major place for Ascaris, right? It's intestine, bloodstream, alveoli, coughed up. There's actually often a syndrome several weeks after exposure when they're going through the pulmonary phase, where you can get eosinophilia and pulmonary issues, and you just wait it out. And then they end up in the intestines again. So I think in her case, the edema that we were seeing was not a lymphatic obstruction, but actually probably having to do with malnutrition. So our kwashiorkor, or marasmus, which I guess we sort of different subtle sort of protein energy malnutrition. Kwashiorkor, which he probably was unfortunately starting to get, and undernutrition, the marasmus. So I wanted to jump in and give us that life cycle. And unfortunately, once you've got adults living in your small intestine, they produce. I'm going to let you guess how many eggs per day. An adult female.
2,000.
200,000 eggs per day per adult female. I mean, it's massive.
Yep.
So, I mean, you can imagine that some of these females contain over 20 million eggs in their uteruses.
How many is that? Over what?
Over 20 million.
Oh, wow.
Which is much more than 9,000.
It is.
It's just massive. I mean, you just think about the amount of energy that's going into this egg production, right?
Yeah.
So when you're in an environment with Ascaris eggs, you're really basically swimming in a sea. They end up in the soil, they embryonate, you keep infecting yourself and everyone else over and over again. So
you have to interrupt that cycle, right? You got to treat a whole village.
That's exactly. Yeah. It takes treatment of a village, right, to raise a child without Ascaris.
In fact, back in TWiP number 21, that was the Ascaris episode. We have a picture of a big jar of Ascaris worms collected from one rural village in Bangladesh in a single day. They treated the whole village and they collected all the worms. And there's this big jar. It's glass. And you can see that it's probably, 10-gallon jar. It's full of worms. It's amazing. It's just amazing. So you just check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes, but this is a picture Dixon gave me a long time ago. It's next to a stack of books, so you can see how big it is. It's just amazing. So you just said something. It takes, what is it? It takes a village. Takes treatment of a whole village?
Takes treatment of a village to raise a child without Ascaris.
Might be a title. It's a bit long.
It is long.
Okay. I like the other one is worms are part of everyday life,
Yeah, no, it is amazing, right? I mean, people live in a different, so here, could you imagine in the United States, you gave someone some albendazole and out came, a jar full of Ascaris, they would probably call you and say, you did not warn me. I mean, they're upset if their urine changes color, right? So
Dixon has a story about a patient he treated, or that was treated here, that they were waiting for the worms to come out. We talked about it on a previous TWiP. And they were in the hospital here, and they were just waiting, and finally, out they came into a pan. I don't know if it's Ascaris or something else, but
there was some of the older drugs that were used to be used were actually paralytic, and so we would get more worms coming out, particularly the cestodes. They would come out paralyzed. And it was sort of more exciting, I think, for the lab technician, because you could really see these full worms coming out instead of just them falling apart, dying. Let's see. The next thing I wanted to touch on was the issue that people brought up about strongyloides, stercoralis, and strongyloides philiborni. And so there's actually so strongyloides philiborni is something we really see I'm going to say almost exclusively in the Pacific, Papua New Guinea type area. It's actually a subspecies of strongyloides. And there's many strongyloides subspecies, right? There's different ones that affect like great apes. It's a gorilla. And they have different pathogenicities. But the philiborni develops this swollen belly syndrome. And I think that may have been our description that came to mind. And I think in this case, the woman has the small 6-year-old child has a swollen belly from just a large amount of Asterisks infection, but it also might be from the malnutrition. But sort of just bringing up the strongyloides filiborni can also give this very interesting swollen belly syndrome. So kudos for thinking about that.
Yeah, it's good. All right. Any other ones you want to touch back on? I think they're all pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, someone mentioned the hookworms, and, she probably has that too. So, I actually did treat her for 3 days just because I figured, boy, she probably is not just a mono-infected situation. So hopefully people like that. And our papers are going to be a little bit friendlier today.
Well, Daniel, these are very interesting papers. One of them is a bit, what word can I say? Well, let's just say this is a mature audience needed for this.
I think so.
So if you're under 18 and listening, please turn it off and do something else. These are all about Toxoplasma gondii and its potential effect on human behavior. We have two papers, a PLOS One paper and a paper in evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, maybe if we start with the PLOS One, then right when we get to them, we'll tell the kids to tune out for.
The PLOS One is very mild, and it's the title is Toxoplasma gondii infection related to brain and behavior impairments in humans? Evidence from a population representative birth cohort. And the first author is Karen Sugden. The last author is Avshalom Caspi. They're from Duke University. And the King's College London and the University of Otago in Dunedin, New Zealand. As everyone knows, Toxoplasma gondii is a protozoan parasite that infects about a third of the human population. And most of these infections are asymptomatic, although I guess, Daniel, if you're immunosuppressed, that can be more of a problem, right?
Well, I think that they're going to be exploring, are they truly asymptomatic infections?
That's right. Are they or not, or you just think so? But with a bad immune system, you can have more serious, obvious,
right? Yeah, obvious, blatant.
And so in the past, infection, so as you know, in the definitive host is the cat, and mice can be infected, and there's good evidence that suggests that infection of mice gets rid of their fear of cat urine. So they're no longer afraid of cat urine. They approach cats and they become eaten. And then if the cat is not infected, it will be by eating the infected mouse. But what is the story in humans? Harder to determine this in humans because can't do the same kinds of studies you could do in mice and cats. And, it's been linked. There have been many studies. I think they mentioned the number of previous studies. A meta-analysis of 38 studies suggests roles in schizophrenia, suicide attempt, aspects of personality, neurocognitive performance. And by the way, the seroprevalence ranges from 3% in South Korea to 76% in Costa Rica. That's the percent of people who are seropositive for T. gondii. That's quite a range, isn't it?
And it really, as sort of from those numbers, there's certain areas of the world where the seroprevalence is very high, above 70%, places like Costa Rica, Brazil, France. And then there's other areas where the seroprevalence is very low, and there's certain cultural reasons why we see that.
Yeah. So in this meta-analysis of 38 studies, it suggests that infection increases the odds of developing schizophrenia 2.7 times. They're also linked with major depressive disorder, and also violent and risk-taking behavior, which is part of poor impulse regulation. When you want to have that sixth beer and you go ahead, that's poor impulse regulation, right?
If you say so.
Well, I don't do that. No, I don't have 6 beers, but I know people do. And then finally, there's evidence that neurocognitive and personality differences exist between seropositive and seronegative individuals. Now, these are hard issues because you always wonder if there's another confounding factor that you're not dealing with, right? When you're just comparing seropositive and seronegative people, who knows in what other ways the two populations might differ. So These are not easy experiments to do. But what they did here is to address this in New Zealand, a population of people in New Zealand, 1,037 individuals who were part of the Dunedin Multidisciplinary Health and Development Study, which is a longitudinal investigation of health and behavior in a population representative birth cohort. So this is Daniel, I guess this is a population they've had for another reason, which has been, as they say, population representatives, which they can then use for this study, right?
Yeah, it actually started in the early 70s, and they're using it as basically a large cohort prospective study.
Yeah, so they have bloods from these individuals, and they can see if they're T. Gondii positive using an ELISA, basically looking for IgG against it. So we know if they're seropositive or seronegative. And that's going to be in contrast to the other study where they just ask people, are you seropositive or seronegative?
Right? Do you know? Has the doctor ever told you?
It's so funny. That's a very different study. And then they assessed different outcome variables. And they have a multi-page table which shows the difference, the different things. They have 4 facets of human behavior: neuropsychiatric disorder, schizophrenia and depression, indicators of poor impulse control like non-suicidal self-injury, attempted suicide, criminal convictions, accident claims, and the big 5 personality traits: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And finally, neurocognitive performance, like general intelligence, executive functions, memory, and processing speed. So these are all standardized tests, I presume, Daniel.
They are, and that's actually the nice thing I'll say for these researchers is, they've got plasma samples available, and so they can just run their ELISAs on those. And then these standardized tests are actually being done at all these various time points, and they're doing assessments on this group 3, 5, 7, 9, etc., all the way up to, and the most recent is now people are at about age 38 when we're getting this assessment done. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of blinded. People aren't answering these questions thinking that, boy, what I say might have some impact upon T. Gondii theories.
Right. All right, so what are the results? They had plasma for 837 of these individuals at age 38, so they're all age matched. 236, or 28.2%, were positive for T. Gondii. They have IgG antibodies above a certain level, okay, which they say that's 28%, is similar to seroprevalence rates in other developed Western countries. And then they use the results of all these various tests to determine these qualities, which we just mentioned, to see if there's any relationship. So first of all, neuropsychiatric conditions, schizophrenia and major depression, seropositivity was not associated with either of these conditions. All right. So they do statistics to ask, and it's clearly not. All right. Poor impulse control is as reflected in the 4 things I mentioned: non-suicidal self-injury, suicide attempt, criminal convictions, traffic-related offenses, and accidents. It makes me think, Daniel, if you speed a number of times in your life and you do one of these surveys, you're going to be considered to have poor impulse control. Well, it may not be, if you're in a hurry to get somewhere. My father, who was a doc, he used to get stopped all the time because he was speeding to get to the hospital, and he would just tell the policeman, I'm on my way to surgery or something, and then he said, most of the time he said the police would lead him there.
Oh, really? That works.
He didn't have poor impulse control. He was just in a hurry.
Yeah. No, I think that the context, right?
Yeah. Anyway, infection with T. Gondii is not associated with non-suicidal self-injury, but there was a suggestive link between infection and suicide attempt. Very weak. No association between positivity and criminal convictions of any type. Okay, the next one, personality differences. This 5-factor modeling of personality. No difference between people who had antibodies versus not in these personality profiles. Neurocognitive performance, that's the last one. There's a whole range of neurocognitive functions, which are all on the table. Let's see if we can give an idea of what some of these are.
IQ, working memory. processing speed.
All standardized tests, right?
Exactly. And nothing gets too even sort of close at all to statistical significance till you get to the total recall and delayed recall in their verbal learning test.
Yeah, so positivity was associated with poor performance on those: verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, etc., motor functions, memory, poor memory performance. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was associated just with poorer memory performance, but all the other tests, there was no difference between seropositive and seronegative individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so pretty much all these things they looked at as negative, with two instances where there were some differences between people who were infected and who were not infected. And they say maybe it's just chance. This finding of learning and memory being affected, maybe it was the only significant difference among the 14 tests. Maybe it was just chance, because none of the other ones differ. And they said, usually a lot of these go in hand. If you have a problem with one, you have a problem with the other, and they never saw that. No difference between infection and schizophrenia. And they say 40 reports have been published showing links between schizophrenia and or psychotic symptoms and infection status. So this is a very different results that they find. And they go on to try and say, why do we have no association where these other studies do? And they say, our study is a small size, but it's powered to detect small differences. And so they think that their finding is right. And the others are all wrong, I guess.
That is where they're going.
I mean, they say it could be a false negative in an accumulating evidence base, but they don't think this is the case. They think it's a very comprehensive study, and it's well-powered, and so they think it's the right answer. And, of course, they only look at age 38, and that's a disadvantage of the study. It would be interesting to look at it throughout different ages, right?
Yeah, you sort of wonder, or, one could hypothesize that the effects are significant during your 20s, and by the time you're 38, you kind of mellow no matter what.
Yeah. They basically say, maybe all the other reports are exaggerated.
Yeah, they say that, don't they?
Yeah, they say a second explanation of our null findings is that earlier reports of links between infection and behavioral impairments are exaggerated.
Yeah.
I don't know.
As you point out, this is actually a study where we have a well-characterized cohorts.
Yeah.
We have a blood test, on our cohort, not just people sort of telling you whether or not they think they're positive or not. So it's a well-done study. But yeah, it is a relatively small sample size, unless the unless the effect is pretty significant, and that's what they're saying. If the effect is significant, we had a large enough sample size that we should have seen it.
They say, in fact, that there's increasing recognition of the role that inflammatory processes play in brain integrity, and frustration with search for causes with lots of disorders, and there's not a lot of progress. And as a result, there's a lot of popular opinion pieces written, and they cite one with the title of "How Your Cat is Making You Crazy," which is wrong, because that's the whole point of this study, is to find out if it is or not. And that article shouldn't say that, right? So people may bias the studies by saying things that they shouldn't, in other words. Whereas, as you say, this is a very carefully carried out study where I think the people didn't even know that they were being tested for toxo and it being correlated with any of these other tests, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's no bias on the part of the people involved in the study to try to push it one way or another. So I think based on this, there's no connection between all these different kinds of human behaviors and Toxoplasma infection. I'm sure that other studies will be done, but if there is as good as this one, that's fine, right? Well, what about our other study? Shall we jump to that? What does it say?
All right, now the other study is in evolutionary psychology, and its title is the relation of Toxoplasma infection and sexual attraction to fear, danger, pain, and submissiveness.
So now the younger people have to tune off. Cover your ears, earmuffs if you're under 18.
So, again, the idea is there something going on in Toxoplasma infected people? And here they're looking at that people who are infected differ in their sexual behavior, desires, and preferences. And specifically, whether infected subjects are more often sexually aroused by their own fear, danger, and sexual submission. And for this, they did an online query, that means internet-based study, with 36,564 Czech and Slovak people. And this was a Facebook page, I believe, right?
Yes.
Facebook page. It's called Guinea Pigs.
Yes.
And it looks for Czech and Slovak nationals willing to take part in this survey. And it's basically a questionnaire that takes them about 90 minutes, right, to fill out the whole thing. And the survey is all about, one of the things they ask them, are you infected with Toxoplasma? And the answers are, I do not know, or I am not sure, I was not tested, or no, I was tested and I'm negative, and yes, I was tested and positive. Mm-hmm. So right there, I think this is one of my biggest problems with this study, is that people are just going to check something, right?
Yeah, there's no objective verification of their toxo-infective status. Yeah. And I guess the premise of this investigation is this concept that's been put forth, right? That and it goes back to the cat and the rodent, the rats, where the idea is the cat odor. This is the sort of prior work back to 2011, 2014, even farther back, that the infection with toxoplasmosis, the cysts in the brain of the infected rats affects through dopamine pathways a perception that now the rats view cat urine as a sexy smell and are drawn to it, as opposed to uninfected rats being having an aversion response.
Right.
And so now I guess they're going to use this very intricate, interesting study design to ask whether there's a similar phenomenon in human beings.
So they had, of these 36,000 plus responders, supposedly 2,470 men were toxo-free, 212 men were toxo-infected, 2,600 toxo-free women, and 529 toxo-infected women. All right, so again, take that with a grain of salt. And then they have this questionnaire of 350 variables, which asks you things about sexual narcissism, your disgust scale, dominance scale, modified attraction to sexual aggression scale. And so if we look at this table, it's very long. The listing of factors: sadism, sexual dominance, homosexuality, violence, whether you're aroused by violence, French kissing, piercing, tattooing, sexual submissiveness, porn watching, group sex, morality-related disgust, anal sex, fetishism, toys, tattooing, zoophilia, like having sex with animals. Oh my gosh, that comes in a bit.
I'm sort of amazed, if you think about it, if you started taking this 90-minute questionnaire, how many people would really complete it?
Well, that's what they do say, in fact, in this, is that only the people that, a certain type of person is going to complete it, maybe because they're really interested in all these terminologies, and that's biasing it in themselselves, right? So you're basically, I guess they presented them with this list of factors of these various, what they're called, they're called factors.
Yeah.
And they ask them if you like this or not, and then they give them a score, and then they use statistics to say whether there's a statistical association between, say, sadism and sexual dominance and Toxoplasma infection. And in fact, on this table, you can look at the p-value, and you can see that there is an association with being infected and liking SATMs. Let me just read it from the with the exception of the exploration excitability, the other three components of the novelty seeking. So novelty seeking has 4 subscales: exploration, excitability, impulsiveness, extravagance, and disorderliness. With the exception of the exploration excitability, the other 3 components are lower in toxo-infected subjects. That means that infected people are, on average, more reflective, tend to require more detailed information, and are not easily distracted. They're more reserved, slow, and controlled. They do not waste their energy in feelings. They tend to be organized, methodical, and prefer activities with strict rules. We suppose that these traits could result in observed differences in reported sexual preferences and activities. Homosexuality showed no association with toxoplasmosis. There's a positive association between toxo-infection and liking sex with animals. In fact, infected female subjects reported they had sex with animals more often than toxoplasma-free subjects. Female responders most often reported having sex with a dog. I just found that really strange, Daniel.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think it's interesting to read this article right after you've read the PLOS One article. Because the PLOS One article is what I'll say is a well-designed study, and it really looking at what is a topic of interest to a lot of people, and I think done in a really systematic way. Hopefully, getting rid of a lot of things that might confound. And then here is this internet-based, really large study, which I think has a lot of questions about how it's conducted. And
here's this. Let me give this summary, which I skipped. Okay, so the infected subjects expressed a lower tendency towards sexual dominance, tattooing and piercing, watching porn, group sex, and are less often engaged in activities that include bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism. However, they expressed higher attraction to bondage, violence, zoophilia, fetishism, and in men also to masochism, raping, and being raped. Generally, infected subjects expressed higher attraction to non-conventional sexual practices, especially bondage and discipline, sadomasochism-related practices, but they also reported to perform such activities less often than the toxo-free subjects. So they have a very statistically significant association between these and infection. But of course, the problem is the nature of the study, and it's based on self-reported information, and you could argue that the people who like these activities are more likely to lie about whether they're infected or not, or do something else, right?
There's also the concern of the bias is that there is a sort of a belief, a commonly held sort of shared idea that toxo has certain impacts. So people, seeing that toxo is one of the questions, might be very sort of interested in supporting, wanting to see that there's an association there. And, it's interesting. They talk about the fact that there is some, they put out sort of a mechanism here. They talk about the dopamine production, the tyrosine hydroxylases catalyzing the pathway of dopamine synthesis. And then this whole idea that maybe there's something here that's going to enhance sexual transmission of toxoplasma. But then they show that there's no evidence of increased sexual activity. So it's interesting. They're trying to spin a whole story here. And I think the challenge is even when you see compelling statistics, to go back to the study design. And does the study design have confounders that are going to end up giving us statistically significant associations?
They make an interesting statement here that says it's highly probable that only a certain kind of people, e.g. extreme altruists or people extremely interested in sex, would spend 90 minutes answering the questions. So we can't generalize the results to the whole Czech population, in other words.
Yeah, I think that's... and then even to the world, the whole world population.
Yeah, of course. The other thing they say, which is interesting, that the toxo infection explains only a small part of the variability in these traits. In other words, it doesn't explain everything that's observed, but a small fraction of people who have this behavior, it may be related to toxo infection. But there are other factors that would make one more interested in BDSM, for example, as well. Anyway, so this is quite a different conclusion, but it looks at different things, right? This is not the same sort of cognitive and neuropsychiatric assessment in the other paper. But,
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing too. None of these specific issues were analyzed in the cohort study.
yeah,
So
no. Now, I suppose you could design another study to look at this in a more controlled way, where you'd have people, having serology determined in a laboratory, and then you ask them questions and so forth. You could actually even have them do it online if they didn't want to do it in person, but you could at least do the bloods and get that.
Take the participants in our first cohort and then have them give a bit more information about these specific topics. But I think it can't be a 90-minute rigorous. I have to admit, as you were going through this, there's certain parts I kind of skimmed a little bit because it's not exactly subject matter that most people are excited to spend 90 minutes immersed in. So,
frankly, Daniel, I'm just amazed at the wide range of things that people do, but I guess it's not surprising, right? Lots of people on Earth, and they're all different.
Yeah.
So, I can imagine that, like they say, exactly, a certain kind of person would want to go through 90 minutes of reading all this stuff. You have to really like it, and that probably biases the study. So I think you'd have to do a shorter survey, right?
I think that's true, and you need sort of everyone coming into it to answer your questions so that you're not just getting a biased.
But I don't think this is going to answer the question. It's not the end of it. We're still going to see articles on how your cat makes you crazy.
Because it's so we say it's a sexy topic. It's an interesting topic. There's a lot of novels. Sure. There's a lot of so. Well,
this paper, the sex paper, was just published last fall. So,
yeah.
I mean, I would probably back when it was published, it stimulated lots of magazine articles about how Toxo makes you sexy.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's a good title. How Toxo makes you sexy. Does Toxo make you sexy?
Yeah, you got to make it a question, right? Because we don't know.
All right. Well, let's move on to a more, I hate to say more mundane, but that's definitely the sexiest paper we've ever done. Too bad Dixon missed it, right?
I think Dixon would have been uncomfortable.
You think? You think so? Okay. Well, we spared him. Well, I was thinking as I'm reading this, you're a trained medical doctor who is trained to deal with these sorts of things. I remember when I was a graduate student, we took a lot of classes with medical students, and they took one class where they were actually shown porn movies over and over again. And I said, what was that for? And they told me it's to desensitize them. So that,
interesting.
I don't know if you had that in your training, but this is New York City, so they actually.
I did train in New York, but no, we did not actually watch porn during my training.
It was medical porn, where they'll have a couple and then they start explaining things and they have sex, and they explain, look at their skin flushing and this, and they would do that a lot to kind of desensitize them. And they told me that was part of their medical training. So I figured, Daniel's going to take this glibly. This is nothing.
No, actually, I have to say it is interesting when you're in the medical field. You start realizing that there's a lot of stuff going on that you didn't realize was going on.
Of course. And, of course, doctors are susceptible as well.
Yes.
They're not. Daniel, you have another case for us?
I do. Oh, we're ready for the case.
We are.
And
we're done with these two papers.
Okay. All right. So I have another case. And so this is hopefully this could be another one where we get a lot of answers. And this is a woman in her 30s, and she's coming in to be seen.
New York City?
No, this is actually out west. This is in Colorado.
Yeah.
And this woman is coming in with a report of foul-smelling loose stools multiple times per day, stomach cramps, and nausea. So I guess we've got another GI distress chief complaint. She reports that these started like a week or more ago, and initially they were most severe the first few days. It got a little bit better, but they're still persisting.
Did you say there was also cramping associated with it?
Yes, stomach cramps and nausea.
Okay.
She doesn't have any fever, doesn't report any other symptoms. And this is the summer. when this is happening. So she says she's been no unusual travel. She's just been heading up to the mountains to the ski towns, Aspen and some other places like that, where she goes hiking and backpacking on the weekends. She was originally from the northeastern part of the U.S., but moved out to Colorado about 1 year before. She also, when asked a little bit more, described that her stools are very sticky, so that she actually has trouble wiping clean afterwards. And this was sort of a provoked question I asked her, and she said, yes, my stools do float in the toilet. Now, Dixon might ask about color. They're a little bit, let's say, not as dark as they had been, so they're a little lighter brown.
Are they well formed?
They're formed, but they're kind of sticky, right? So they're not the usual. But it's not liquid. It's not liquid stool. It's formed, sticky, floating stool.
Formed, sticky, and floating. Wow, that's another.
There's a little bit of looseness in there too, but it's okay.
Okay.
And I should say, prior to this woman reported no medical problems, no prior surgeries. She's not allergic to anything. She didn't have anything exciting to tell us about family history.
Is she married?
She is not.
So she's single, so there's no family to ask about here, right? She lives alone?
Let's see. She lives alone in a private house that she's renting.
And there's not an earth floor, right?
No, she lives in a modern home.
And what, is she an adventurous eater? Like when she backpacks, what does she do? Does she drink from the streams?
They do. Yeah, occasionally she'll drink from the streams.
Ah, okay.
But she'll try to, I asked her a little bit about how she treated it. And what a lot of people will often do is they'll take their Nalgene water bottles and they'll throw iodine, they'll shake it up, and then they'll drink it. Okay.
Yeah, we've talked about water purification before.
Yeah, but we don't know how good a job she's doing there.
Yep. And she brings food with her, I guess, or she just goes out for the day, so she doesn't need to eat anything.
No, so sometimes she does some overnight trips, and so they pack food in with them, and then they'll cook stuff up on a little portable stove.
Okay. They don't shoot their food on those trips.
No shooting of food. It's all brought with them.
Got it.
She doesn't take any medications. She actually works at one of the local breweries there in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Oh, I know Fort Collins, yes.
I won't mention which brewery, right? We'll keep that a little.
There's quite a few of them.
They are. Some of them are quite good.
I like Fort Collins a lot. Yeah.
So when asked about substance use, she does drink beer on occasion.
Drinks beer, but no. What's the word?
Other toxic habits.
No other toxic habits.
Yes.
Okay. And her coworker. Now, does she go away on these trips with anyone else, or does she go alone?
No, she usually goes with a group of friends.
And have any of these friends reported similar problems?
Just her.
Well,
yeah, she actually reports that she met a bunch of people that had grown up in Colorado, and they've been taking her and sort of showing her different places to go backpacking.
Okay. Now, throughout this, stool problem and cramping and nausea, does she still continue to go backpacking, or has she stopped as a consequence?
No, she's still gone, but she's not feeling so great.
Okay.
And what shall I say? So sexual history, we'll throw that in. She is sexually active and does not always use protection. So we counsel her, of course, on that. I think I mentioned travel geographic. No travel other than just locally around Colorado. Raised in the Northeast, moved out there.
Right.
Physical exam was really unremarkable.
A healthy 30-year-old.
Healthy 30-year-old.
Okay, I'm good with that.
All right. And so what will our questions be? What do people think will be the differential for what this young woman might have? Second, what testing might we do to confirm? And then third, sort of think it through. If you think it's X, then what would be the appropriate treatment and expected outcome?
Now, I want to back up just a second. So physical exam, unremarkable, means no distension of any kind, no abdominal pain on palpation and so forth, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the belly is soft, non-tender, normal bowel sounds, no enlargement of the liver, spleen, lungs, heart, all clear and regular rate. And she looks fine.
So heart rate is good and blood pressure is good, all that, right?
Exactly. No fever.
No fever, right.
Yeah, breathing comfortably.
Okay. Very good.
Well,
we have 2 emails. We have one from Elise, who writes, Dear TWiP Trifecta, how are you? I hope to be reporting that I am back from beyond and that I can be a responsible TWiP contributor. It has been a pretty chilly spring in Lower Manhattan, and all kinds of rain is predicted for the future. Have you been to Mars, Elise? You said you're back from beyond. Just kidding. I don't mean to make you feel badly. We just missed you. I suspect that the young mother and her son described in the case from TWiP 132 have pinworm infections. Symptoms consistent with the basic pinworm signifiers, itchy anal areas, itch gets worse at night while the pinworms are laying their eggs. While the woman would like to suggest that her sister's children are the vector for this infestation, and she may be right because children often share pinworms with one another, her volunteer work with lots of children also provides other opportunities for infection. Still, her sister's kids, since they stayed in the home for a while, are the most likely suspects. What was the verdict when she asked her sister if her kids had any symptoms? Can you answer that?
She did not.
Yeah.
I actually asked specifically about that, and that was you could imagine how that might be a sort of taboo topic to accuse your sister's kids of being worm infested.
Yeah. Diagnosis can be done in a variety of ways, looking for live worms around the anus and in bedclothes, or using tape around the anus first thing in the morning to collect eggs. If pinworms are present, the entire house will need to be cleaned and all clothing and bedclothes washed with hot water. Everyone should be treated. Some people have no symptoms even when they have a pinworm infestation, and unless everyone is treated, pinworms can come back and run rampant again. Everyone in the household will need to follow the medication protocol at the same time to ensure that the pinworms have been eradicated from all hosts. Getting rid of pinworms is tricky because everyone needs to take the medication and take great care with hygiene. Thank you so much for all of your work. I have missed being a regular contributor. Many best wishes, Elise in Lower Manhattan. Well, at least she got it right. Welcome back.
Yes, she did.
She was just a couple days late. Now we got one more, Daniel.
All right. So I read this. Scott writes, Vince, he's writing to you though, Vincent. So I'll read it to you, Vincent. Dear Vincent, there's no dear actually, but there was a bit of confusion expressed in the current TWiP about the candiru, a parasitic catfish of the family Trichomysteridae and native to the Amazon basin that was discussed at some length. As a serious freshwater aquarist, I have been aware of this fish since first reading the account of it in Gunther Sturba's 1966 classic, Freshwater Fishes of the World, which includes a drawing of it. I would recommend a fairly complete and informative article in Wikipedia about the species. Vandalia serosa, species in the genus most commonly blamed for being a human parasite. It is interesting to say the least, and worth the time it takes to read. Seems that it's not as scary as one might believe, considering the internet legends and general misinformation circulating about it. But it is an interesting species with an interesting lifestyle nevertheless. And he gives us a link there. Regards, Scott from Cartago, Costa Rica.
All right, I should have looked this up last time, but yes, candiru is a fish, a small fish, toothpick fish. It's a species of parasitic freshwater catfish, and they are they can grow up to 16 inches long. It looks rather thin in this picture. These species are known for an alleged tendency to invade and parasitize the human urethra. However, despite ethnological reports dating back to the late 19th century, the first documented case of the removal from a human urethra did not occur until 1997, and even that incident has remained a matter of controversy. So there's this thought that this fish crawls into male or female urinary tract, but most of the accounts are wrong, and they say there's only one documented case. This is the one in 1997. This man in Brazil claimed a candiru jumped from the water into his urethra as he urinated while thigh deep in a river. And then he underwent surgery to remove the fish from his body. Anyway, so there are more reports here, but you can read them. And when Dixon gets back, we'll have him weigh in because he has talked about this before. I guess you've never seen this kind of infestation, right, Daniel?
Well, yeah, apparently there's only been one case in 1997. No, but it reminded me, I was seeing a patient, I don't know if I mentioned this on the last TWiP, but who had, he had kidney failure, actually had to have kidney transplants. And kidney failure, what happened? What disease? Oh, it was from electrocution. It was from trauma. And I was trying to figure out, how do you electrocute yourself to take out both your kidneys? And I sort of had this vision of him urinating onto an electrical source, sort of similar to this man when the Kandura jumped up. It sounds a little far-fetched, right? That you're peeing in the water and that this fish is going to somehow decide it would be nice to swim up your urethra. So,
Daniel, after reading the last paper, I can imagine how this fella electrocuted himself and destroyed both kidneys. He may be toxopositive.
Yeah, maybe you have an idea how the catfish really got up the man's urethra.
Yeah, that could be as well. All right, that is TWiP 134. You can find it at Apple Podcasts, microbe.tv/TWiP. Or, of course, there are many podcast listening apps for your smartphone, either iOS or Android. And you can just subscribe to TWiP in any of those so you get each and every episode. Of course, it's free. If you'd like to support our work financially, become a patron of Microbe TV, you can go to microbe.tv/contribute. And we have different ways you can do that on Patreon, PayPal, etc. And we'd be eternally grateful for your support. If you have questions or comments, or you want to take a guess for the case study, you can send that to twip@microbe.tv. And Daniel, we ought to tell people when we're going to record the next episode, so that way they can make sure they get their guess in on time. Do you have any sense for when we're going to do that?
We usually try to give people about 10 days, right? So we usually say that, before the 2nd of June, right? That'd be about 10 days. Before the 2nd of June, get your emails, get your guesses in.
The 2nd of June, let's call that, though we'll probably record a bit later, but that gives people plenty of time. And that way you won't be late. Of course, if you are late, we'll still read it the next week.
I think that's why we went to recording every 2 weeks, right? To give them time to get the emails in.
That's right. Daniel Griffin is at Columbia University Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. And you know what, Daniel? Last time I had given a link to parasitic diseases, and you said, no. But in fact, I did buy that.
Oh, you did? Okay.
What did I get? Diseases6.com? Yeah, I bought this for Dixon. Parasitic diseases and the number 6.com. And it goes right to the listing of the book.
To the book. Oh, that's great.
People want to get that
feel
as well.
Feel free to pop that in for...
I will put that into the show notes. Parasitic diseases. Let's see. To my mind, parasitic diseases 6.com. Anyway, thank you, Daniel.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. The music you hear on TWiP is composed and performed by Ronald Jenkins. You can hear his work at ronaldjenkins.com. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Another TWiP
is
parasitic.